Yet again, a guillotine stops debate immediately before I was scheduled to speak against this bill, and after pushing all three One Nation senators who are speaking to the bottom of the list. One Nation opposed the guillotine. We want to know why the Coalition and the Greens join with Labor in supporting Big Pharma. This is significant legislation, except Senator Canavan. Thank you, Senator Canavan. This is significant legislation, and I'll go so far as to say it's the worst legislation I've seen in 9 years in the Senate. It's dangerous. There are many, many amendments that need answers. There are many speakers that missed out. There are many questions. So first question I have for you is, why are you avoiding scrutiny? This is half a bill. The bill establishes what the CDC director can do. It does not, though, establish what the director cannot do. There's nothing in this legislation to establish rules around the following, so can you please clarify? A process for determining where the CDC will be located and what the site features should be. What protections to the community? What research will be conducted at the CDC, if any? Will that research include gain-of-function research, which was the cause of the COVID outbreak in 2019, which killed millions of people? Who will own the taxpayer-funded CDC research? There are no answers to these questions. These are fundamental. What research will be conducted in cooperation with research facilities overseas? And what countries should be excluded on national security grounds, starting with the Wuhan Institute of Virology? And exclude Anthony Fauci's haunts, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and America's National Institutes of Health, and Fauci's colleagues, including Ralph Barrick and Peter Daszak. Will live animal testing be conducted? And if so, on what animals and how? Whether research will be conducted on behalf of commercial corporations, and if so, who owns the taxpayer-funded research? What annual reporting will be produced to alert the Parliament and the Australian people about the risks to which they are being exposed? If the CDC facility handles sensitive material, what level of containment will be used, and what will be the process for investigating and rectifying breaches? And what is the purpose of and limit to research? Is it just ego, look what we can do, or is there a genuine medical outcome they're working towards? We know the CSIRO at its Geelong facility is already conducting risky experiments on deadly viruses such as Ebola, and they're experimenting on animals. Those questions, in addition to what's happening with taxpayer funds, because we know that CSIRO monetises their research, or used to, and we know lately the CSIRO has been publishing the results of their research, allowing corporations to piggyback off that research free of charge, saving them years in developing new drugs from which the Australian taxpayers will have no commercial benefit. The taxpayers pay and get no benefit. This is the state of medical research in Australia. What impact will the CDC have on this CSIRO? We don't know. The bill doesn't set out these matters. It's a glaring omission. The Minister says the Australian CDC will undertake technical and advisory functions based on its public health expertise. And advisory functions based on its public health expertise, knowledge and access to relevant information. What expertise? It hasn't started yet. You're assuming bureaucrats and health officials actually have the expertise and knowledge to perform these studies, yet there's nothing in this bill to say they must have that knowledge. Nothing. This is a pretense to give thank-you jobs to COVID-era health officials who have a track record of very dangerous, dishonest and inhuman decisions. These bureaucrats will be given given powers that the Chief Medical Officer, for example, must be a doctor. The Director of the CDC does not. What could possibly go wrong? And then continuing the cover-up from the government, freedom of information, an issue which One Nation Senator for Western Australia, Senator Whitten has raised is the changes the bill makes to the Freedom of Information Act. The bill amends the Freedom of Information Act 1982 to exempt the CDC from Freedom of Information applications to which the same documents are currently open. I wonder if this is to cover up information from the COVID years or just getting ahead of the next lab leak. And finally, Minister, sensitive biological agents. I've already discussed them with regard to Ebola. The CDC bill transfers responsibility for the security-sensitive biological agents regulatory scheme from the department to the Australian CDC. This scheme regulates certain biological agents that are considered dangerous. Now let's take a closer look at this one. Who decides if a biological agent is sensitive and subject to extra checks? The CDC. Who's most likely to be importing sensitive biological agents like Ebola and heaven knows what else? The CDC. Who's now their own regulator? You guessed it, the CDC. This is a recipe for no accountability, a recipe for disaster, a recipe for rampant, unbridled control over the people. Officially, this bill simply brings together powers spread across several departments into one place. If that's really the case, Minister, why does the bill have a price tag of $250 million for the first 3 years and then $73 million per year after that? Shouldn't the cost of the CDC be offset through savings in other departments? If that's all they intend, then that would be true. Clearly, the Australian CDC will be doing much, much more. You've given them the money to do it, and they'll be doing it away from prying eyes, protected with freedom of information blocks and negligible reporting criteria, regulating itself and sending the bill to the taxpayers. In 9 years in the Senate, this is one of the worst bills with which I've dealt. Minister, I've given you many questions. I'd like some answers.
Minister.
Thanks very much, and I'll come back to the question asked by Senator Ruston in relation to the FOI arrangements and whether the exemptions proposed in the definitions in Section 5 would extend to states and territories. The advice that I have, Senator, is no. The exemption simply indicates that the FOI would be, under the Act, it would be an exempt document if there is a risk that publishing a document or material could cause physical harm or threats of harm, social stigma, bullying, vilification or other harm other than commercial or economic harm to an individual or group. A state or territory would not be considered an individual or group under that definition, Senator. I've listened to the contribution made by Senator Roberts, which I think proceeds from a fundamental misunderstanding about the purpose of the Australian Centre for Disease Control. And in particular, Senator, you seem to assume that medical or scientific research would be conducted by the Centre and would be amongst the responsibilities of the Director-General. Perhaps to reassure you, Senator, you may wish to turn to page 15 of the legislation, which sets out the functions of the Director-General. And I won't read all of it out because that would take too long, but I would indicate that if you scan it, you will see that the function is to provide advice on public health matters to the Minister at the request of the Minister, providing advice to or consulting with Commonwealth entities on public health matters, providing advice to or consulting with state or territory governments on health matters, providing advice to or consulting with international organisations, gathering and analysing information relating to public health matters, providing advice or consulting with a long list of bodies on public health matters, and developing, publishing or promoting standards or communications. That's the short version of the material that's set out in the published bill from page 15 onwards. I think it's careful when we have debates, important when we have debates of this kind, that we do conduct them in an honest way, Senator. I spoke in my earlier contribution about the challenges of misinformation. All senators have a role to provide accurate information about the bills that are before this chamber. I don't think coming here and characterising this bill as a bill that relates to the conduct of scientific research by a new body is accurate, and I'd invite you to reflect on the bill that has actually been circulated and perhaps confine your remarks to these particular policy proposals that the government is bringing forward.
Senator Thorpe.
Thank you.